Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. Please join Council and me in O Canada. Thank you, everybody. And now, I'd just like to remind everybody that in 1820, Indigenous people here began welcoming settlers from all over the British Empire. Soon, they were helping slaves escaping from the United States to settle here too. Today, our Indigenous founding partners are still here enjoying their land with us. They fish and camp under their Treaty 22 rights. Indigenous people, in their thousands, also live with us as neighbors and friends. Our Indigenous white and Black settlers created a community with an attractive degree of harmony and prosperity. In 1857, Ontario gave official recognition of Oakville as a town. At Town Hall, all these years later, we fly the flag of the Mississaugas of the Credit beside the flags of Oakville, Ontario, and Canada. We fly these flags together to acknowledge our origins. Today, people from all over the world are attracted to the livability we have created. We offer newcomers a warm spirit of welcome. We offer everyone our founding story so everyone knows what we are part of. We feel sorrow and distress for acts of racism and intolerance suffered here at home and across Canada. We want our future to be equitable and inclusive for everyone. The path of truth and reconciliation can unite us all. Please keep well, stay safe, and let us on Council know of any chance to be helpful to you and yours. Please let us know anytime you can help increase Oakville's harmony, prosperity, and livability. Madam Clerk, are there any regrets for this evening's meeting?
There are no regrets for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. So, Council, tonight we have a confidential matter, and I'm proposing to move it to the very end so that we can release our translator captioner while, and not have them sitting around doing nothing. So that'll go down to the very end, just before the bylaws. And now, if you're familiar with and comfortable with the minutes that have been presented in the agenda, I would welcome a mover and seconder on those. Councillor Dudek and Councillor Lischina, thank you. Are there any corrections to the minutes? There being none, the minutes are now adopted. We have no public presentations, but it would be in order for two of us to move us into Committee of the Whole. Councillor Giddings and Councillor Palmer, thank you very much. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there was none, so that carries, and we are now in Committee of the Whole. The big distinction here is that we only need a mover and not a seconder for items considered in the Committee of the Whole. Council, you have several consent items, 7.1 and 7.2, and no confidential consent items. And I would look for a mover for the consent items. Councillor Elger, thank you very much. Any objection? Madam Clerk, the consent items are adopted. Now we have several discussion items, and items 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4 are the confidential discussion items, and they're the ones we'll move to the end of the meeting. So now we begin with discussion item number 1, 9.1, the roadmap for townwide rainwater management strategy. And we have an important presentation from our Commissioner, Phoebe Fu, our Commissioner of Community Infrastructure. Ms. Fu, welcome. We are looking forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next slide, please. Today, I'm here in front of you to present to you the townwide rainwater management strategy and the roadmap and how we get there. The town of Oakville declared a climate emergency in 2019 for the purpose of deepening Oakville's commitment to protect our community, economy, and environment from climate change. To increase our resiliency to more severe and frequent storms, we are creating a roadmap to improve our rainwater infrastructure, including all town-owned tangible and natural assets, such as pipes, shoreline, harbor shoreline, piers, riverines, stormwater ponds, culverts, and ditches. Over the years, much work has already been completed, including various studies, the master plan, environmental assessments, and capital improvements on our rainwater-related infrastructure. While we also have been hard at work in developing long-term asset management plans for life cycle renewal purposes per legislative requirements. Next slide, please. Oakville has already experienced consequences attributed to the climate change crisis, such as the 2019 record-setting high lake levels, shoreline erosion, and flooding of our parks and trails, and the ice storm of December 2013. We need to manage our rainwater runoff effectively and efficiently using the various assets. What is water runoff? Water runoff is rain, snowmelt, and other precipitation that collects on the ground surface. It runs off roofs, streets, and other land surfaces and get absorbed by plants and soils. Services that restrict the natural infiltration or flow of the water into the ground, such as roads, buildings, parking lots, hard landscaping, increases the amount and the speed of the stormwater runoff. Not only the weather contribute to the runoff, though, but decisions we make around our houses, such as increased hardscaping, fencing, and filling in the ditches and swales, all impact flood potential around our house. So let's take a look at the different type of flooding that could potentially occur. Next slide, please. There are many types of flooding. Urban flooding is when drainage systems cannot handle the volume of water, resulting in overland flow. Water may seep through building walls, floors, and back up in the building through stormwater pipes. There are also basement flooding. This is when groundwater and runoff enter into the sanitary sewer system and causes backup, surcharging of the mainline system into the home. Riverine flooding is when extreme rain and melting snow cause the river to rise and spill over the banks into the area next to it. And there's also lake flooding, is when high water levels in the lake or storm cause the lake to overflow along the shoreline. Before we get into the townwide strategy, let's take a look at the various roles and responsibilities between the town, region, and Conservation Halton. Next slide, please. To manage rainwater, there are 3 parties involved. Basement flooding is related to the sanitary sewer, which is the responsibility of Halton Region. Halton Region is responsible for managing the sanitary sewer mains that carry sewage from the home to the wastewater treatment plants. The region owns the sanitary sewer mains under the street and the lateral up to the property line. The homeowner is responsible for the sanitary laterals from the house to the property line. When a sewer are in a pure condition with cracks or holes, it may create blockages and can leave a home at risk for sewer backups and basement flooding. Further, the capacity of the sanitary sewer is only designed to take wastewater and not stormwater. So if there is stormwater entering the sanitary sewer, which is commonly called inflow and infiltration, I&I, it will also cause the sanitary sewer to overflow and cause basement flooding. The region has a basement flooding mitigation program to make improvements to the sanitary infrastructure and also has an enhanced basement flooding prevention subsidy to help homeowners reduce their risks. Next slide, please. The town, we manage a stormwater system for over 50 years. This includes having policies and standards in the way we design, build, and maintain rainwater infrastructure. The town manages a stormwater system, which is broken into minor and major drainage systems. The town has had a rainwater-related network in place for a number of years, and we continue to enhance as design standards has evolved over time. The minor system consists of catch basins, storm sewer pipes, ditches, swale, and road culverts. These are typically sized to handle usual storm events such as the 1-in-5-year event. The major drainage system includes overland flow routes such as road right-of-ways, man-made diversion channels, and natural waterways like creeks. This system handles flows that are too large for the minor system, which is resulting from more severe storm events. Protecting our creeks and from erosion and monitoring diversion channels is important in maintaining functionality of the overall network. In the newer development, stormwater management ponds and retention basins is part of the drainage system that help to control the flow of water into the major overland drainage system. These retention basins help to contain large amount of water so they don't enter the stream all at once. When incorporated with the minor and major system together, they're designed to handle the 100-year storm event. Next slide. For our rivers and creeks, the Conservation Health and Authority has a responsibility of creating and regulating floodplain mapping and issue flood warnings, while we as a town look after the erosion program. Protecting our creek from erosion and monitoring diversion channels is important to maintain the functionality of the overall network. The town performed creek inspection every 5 years, with the most recent assessment performed in 2021. A slope monitoring program will also be initiated in 2022. Next slide, please. For our shorelines and harbors, the town monitors lake levels, conduct assessments, and identify ongoing restoration works. Town shorelines are inspected every 5 years with the assessment that's currently underway to be completed this year. Through the Town Asset Management Planning Program, condition assessments are regularly completed on the various rainwater-related assets to determine what renewal, rehabilitation work are required over the near and the long term. Town staff also perform a number of operational and maintenance activities to ensure the rainwater network operates as planned, including tracking and monitoring flood calls and working with the region and conservation authorities to respond as required. It is important to recognize that all these assets need to work together as part of the overall drainage system, not one type of infrastructure work alone. The integration of the various assets from ditches, roads, sewers, storm ponds, and rivers provides the level of protection for our neighborhoods. This is why it is very important to develop a comprehensive long-term plan for these rainwater infrastructure. Next slide. Moving on from what the town is responsible for and the regular asset management activity that we conduct, town has also over the many years completed a number of studies in response to climate change. These studies assess how to improve our rainwater infrastructure to adapt and become more resilient. And they're outlined in more detail in Appendix A of the report, which I won't go through here. Previously, the previous CAO, Ray Green, presented to Council in 2015, showing how stormwater practices have evolved over the years. The town has been progressive in the management of stormwater through developing policies, guidelines, and use best practices to ensure our community is protected and more resilient. All of this work to date will form the foundation as an input into the town-wide rainwater management strategy, where the various recommendations from the completed and the ongoing studies will be prioritized and form an improvement plan moving forward. Next slide. Other than having foundational studies to guide the rainwater management strategy moving forward, we have not stopped working and making improvements around the town. Much work has been completed to enhance our rainwater infrastructure to increase our resiliency and mitigate to climate change and maintain our infrastructure in a state of good repair. Over the past several years, a total of $19.7 million, I'll just name a few, in protecting waterfront park shorelines and harbor seawalls, such as the 16-Mile Creek West Shore and the Tannery Park improvements, and the Vista and Shelburne Promenade shoreline improvements. Next slide. In addition, another $16.1 million in creek shoreline stormwater capital program have also been completed or underway, such as the Westminster Drive stormwater outfall to support the Coronation Park channel improvements that is planned for later on this year, and the Maplewood storm sewer, including the upsizing and the extension, which is just completed last year. Next slide. We also have done work in the creeks in terms of the erosion work for both Morrison and Munns Creek. These are just some of the examples of recent work completed on and ongoing. Next slide. We have also incorporated recommendations from the various studies into the 10-year capital forecast. There are approximately $37 million in improvement that has been included in the 2022 to 2031 capital forecast, which was presented to Council last December. This includes stormwater pipelining and replacements that applies to from the master plan phase 2. We also have a new trunk underground storm sewer system along Westminster, and we have ditches and outlet improvements along Woodhaven Park, and including Morrison and Joshua Creek erosion works. In addition, there's also rehab related to seawalls at the Shipyard Park and for Birdo Point as well, coming out of the harbor risk and flood assessment study. Next slide. With all that we have accomplished, we need to continue to build on this work and plan into our future. The town will develop a town-wide rainwater management strategy that takes a comprehensive approach to integrate the state of good repair work along with the improvements to increase resiliency of the town's rainwater-related infrastructure. The purpose of the strategy is to develop long-term capital plan roadmap and a supporting financial strategy to mitigate impact of climate change. The outcome of the strategy will provide a defined capital program that with needs identified and prioritized over a long term to address climate change adaptation and improve resiliency, and a financing plan including consideration and evaluation of a dedicated funding source. The Asset Management Department will be leading the strategy, but will be collaborating with Transportation Engineering, Parks and Open Space, and Finance Departments. Although the strategy is infrastructure focused, we recognize the linkage between new development and how we address drainage. Town has policies, standards related to development stormwater design. We ensure that all new development does not increase risk to flooding. The town is taking a comprehensive approach to managing our rainwater, where the strategy could further inform town stormwater related policies, standards, and practices. Next slide. The rainwater management strategy is a multi-year project that will encompass 3 phases. In phase 1, this has already been underway. It's planned to be completed this year, where we're going to identify all the needs from the various studies and the life cycle assessments. This phase will tell us what and the value of the improvements we need for each asset class. In phase 2, we will develop a corporate prioritization tool, including cost benefit and risk analysis. Then we will use this prioritization tool and evaluate all the needs from phase 1 and produce a long-term capital plan. We will be coming back and report to Council with a recommended long-term capital plan in mid-2023. Phase 3 will include the development and assessment of funding options to support the delivery of this long-term capital plan and develop a public engagement strategy and implementation plan. The town has been managing rainwater-related infrastructure for over 50 years, with many capital works already been implemented and additional improvement planned for the over next 10 years. This strategy will provide us with a long-term capital plan and sustainable funding strategy beyond that 10 years. By looking at this comprehensively, the strategy will review the variety of the competing interests, assess the risk and benefits, and creates an implementation plan that will be phased over 30 to 50 years. As the previous CEO said, we have been on a journey of evolution in stormwater management. This strategy will build on the good work completed to date and the sound policy we have in place to further enhance our community resiliency to combat and mitigate the impact of climate change. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
And as it happens, you've generated questions, and we'll lead off with Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Phoebe. I'm very impressed with this report into the future, and I know it's a challenge in Oakville with respect to flooding and knowing what the climate changes that are upon us. One question: have we, in the process of stormwater or rain strategy, have we indicated in the town boundaries where our floodplain locations are? Are they mapped out anywhere in our documentation?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The Conservation Halton is the authority that map out the floodplains for each of the areas within town of Oakville. So the flood mapping is available through Conservation Halton. They are also currently reviewing the flood lines as we speak. They're doing a study to revisit the hazard lines, as they call it. So they should come out with the new flood lines sometimes next year. So, but there is published flood lines along our river ring system in terms of where the flood potentially spills for the regional event.
That's important. I think the public needs to have an awareness of in the future, you know, when we're buying and selling or developing homes in those floodplain areas, that should be one of the areas of not concern, but awareness. The last question with respect to infill building. And I know we've had challenges where homes are digging deeper in locations where the water table is relatively high, and they're putting 1, 2, 3 sump pumps in these new homes because they want 12-foot ceilings in their basement. Is there any consideration of restricting development with respect to the depth of in those areas with respect to we have flooding issues or high water tables?
We certainly recognize that, through Chair, that the development in existing neighborhood has impact to the existing stormwater system. The overall drainage system, though, in an existing neighborhood is quite complex. As you would imagine, it was designed for us to take certain type of storm. And these infill development also have a stringent control process that we put through as we review them. So we are reviewing the relationship between these larger homes that's coming into existing neighborhoods and the impact to the existing storm system. And through the rainwater strategy, we'll review those relationships and make recommendations accordingly.
Thank you, Phoebe. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm really glad for the attention that all of this work is getting. It's important work, and I know it's a long-term project. It won't finish and just end. It'll continue on for a long time. I want to draw attention to one of the items on the status of outstanding issues on page 87 of 90 of our agenda, which is the request for report on stormwater management standards for ditches and culverts, which it shows under the status that it's on the agenda for today. And while I went through the report, I didn't see specific responses to the request for information and in effect the direction to look for ways of providing better information to the public. Is that going to be incorporated into future work?
Yes.
Because it wasn't specific in the report.
Yes, through Mr. Chair. Yes, the request for report is related to look at the ditches standards and the design standard related to ditches. In the overall rainwater strategy, we will be looking at the overall condition of our ditches in the older neighborhoods. And then at that time, we will be assessing the design standards related to the ditches. So the references to this report as to an action that will be happening in the near future, not necessarily. You're correct, that is not in this report that we address the specific standards. So we will be coming back to council with that information once we have completed our ditches assessment.
Okay. Could I ask our clerks if this item on the status of outstanding issues could be updated and retained on our list so that it continues to be caught and recognized as an outstanding item?
The clerks have assented. That was
Sorry,
a yes.
Mayor Burton, I couldn't hear that.
The clerk said yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you for the report. It's very important in terms of going forward. I know that Ward 1 has had a lot of issues with water in basements, water in staying in ditches and culverts, and many residents who are concerned about it. I have 3 questions. One, in terms of risk levels and priorities. Who decides that a specific street or area would be deemed high priority versus lower priority in terms of stormwater and subsequently rainwater strategies?
Stream share. The prioritization for the overall rainwater management strategy will still need to be developed as part of phase 2 work. In terms of how we will develop that, it will be based on a risk approach in terms of the benefit of, in terms of how many homes are impacted, what are the triggers in terms of flooding. For example, road flooding would have potentially lower priority compared to a basement flooding because we want to minimize the impact to our residents. That is all to be developed in phase 2 of the overall strategy. Further, the input from those foundational studies that I mentioned, such as the Stormwater Master Plan, has a priority risk assessment in there as well. That would also become an input into the overall strategy amongst all the assets to get prioritized.
Thank you. This next question probably goes to the request report that Councillor Adams addressed. Can you explain to the public the difference between flooding and ponding in terms of ditches and culverts?
Through Mr. Can you clarify flooding and, I just want to make sure I understand the question.
We have-
Flooding and ponding in culverts?
When residents are worried because water is staying in ditches and staying in culverts, so they're worried about things like stagnant water, West Nile virus, and they're worried that it's sitting there so another rainstorm is going to actually make it unsafe for their area and too much water for that ditch or culvert. How do we determine what is ponding and what is flood risk?
I see. Stream share. Flood risk is determined based on how our, say, the resident or the building or the property is impacted. So when we start looking at prioritizing flood risk, we look at how many properties or infrastructure or rivers impacted in terms of the infrastructure degradation. Ponding is, as you mentioned, when the water sits in a ditch and is not positively draining. That is something that we will look at more from a health in terms of West Nile virus. There are systems where it's designed that some ponding may occur. So then it's not considered a flood risk if it's just ponding. I hope I answered that question.
So how does that work in terms of us and health standards and with the region in terms of West Nile? Who is responsible then for checking the safety of that in terms of health?
Streams here. So related to the West Nile, that our roads and work department does work with the region counterparts in terms of looking at West Nile ponding. From a drainage perspective, we do like to see positive draining. So there is a desire to ensure that our drainage system positively drain to, say, ultimately, say, the lake. So then that is something that our roads and work department also responds to. However, it has to have, there's some recognition that some systems are designed to have water in it continuously because it's either continuously flowing, hopefully positively, or it is ponding for a short period of time, but would not necessarily create the flood hazard.
In those cases, how does planting native plants and things work in that in terms of your strategy?
Through the strategy, we are mostly focused on the infrastructure itself. However, we will looking at education and promotion aspects of ways for a property to protect themselves, such as ensuring the swales there, planting less impervious areas. So the promotion and education component of flood risk mitigation will also be part of the overall program.
Thank you. That's great in terms of the educational piece. My last question goes to the hardscaping aspect. And I know this is probably outside, but I'm not sure how much this strategy will work with planning and looking at zoning bylaws that say a percentage of property has to remain softscaped in order to allow for drainage, because right now we see larger homes being infilled with pools, with sports courts, and virtually no grass remaining at all, no garden, no softscape at all. How does that work in terms of this strategy?
This strategy, as I mentioned through Mr. Chair, is focused on the infrastructure, the asset management component, to ensure that we have sufficient capacity to take on the more severe storms and to improve the resiliency to our community. In relation to zoning bylaw or development of infills, we certainly are aware that the drainage system work together and their impact. This strategy will inform opportunities for guiding our principles and control measures on the stormwater management side, on the development side.
Thank you. I think it's really important that residents realize that piece of it, the open roadways, ditches, culverts versus their private land, and where your job ends in terms of the strategy. And so thank you for that, because that was great information.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for bringing out that we all have a role to play. Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Commissioner. Further to Councillor Robertson and Chisholm's comments, the more water we can prevent from hitting the roadway or the ditch, the better off we are. So I guess further to Councillor Robertson's question, would this include your recommendations in terms of further look for dry wells, French drains, that kind of apparatus to keep the water on the resident's lot?
As Mr. Chair, the strategy is the public infrastructure on the right-of-way, so that we want to make sure we have long-term plan and financial strategy related to that. We will have an educational component to help the residents to protect themselves from minimizing their flood risk, and it would include anything from those aspects, including pointing them to, for example, the region's backflow prevention and the subsidies that they provide. So there will be an education component. However, the recommendations of the strategy will focus on the infrastructure improvements required for the next 30 to 50 years.
All right, so we'll have to follow that through other options and in other areas. All right, in the report, it talked about a newer design practice when it was describing stormwater management ponds. Do we have a new design, or is that just saying that over the past probably 25 years, some of the newer subdivisions, that's when stormwater management ponds came into being, if you will?
Through Mr. Chair, Councilor Gidding, you're correct. It's just describing the evolution of stormwater management practices.
All right, and one of the reports that talked about underground tanks as offline flood storage. Is that what I would refer to as an underground tank or underground stormwater management pond?
Through Mr. Chair, the town does have a couple underground stormwater tanks. So they will be behaving similar to the stormwater retention basins, the ponds, in terms of storing the water and release it slowly into our outlet or in the creeks.
All right, we have one at Cornwall and Chartwell beside the paramedics there. And that's used when there's a challenge in terms of size where you need to go deeper, or lot line to lot line, for lack of a better word. It's for capacity.
Through Mr. Chair, I don't have the specific of this particular location. I could certainly get back to Councillor Giddings on that.
All right, and two other quick questions. Councillor Haslett Thiel and I learned that recently that parking lots are used as storm retention to slow down the flow of water into the storms. Is there something to be said for the requirement for higher curbs to retain more water or to delay more water from hitting the storm sewers?
Through Mr. Chair, when we review the overall strategy, we will look at opportunities where there need to be improvements made to minimize the impact of downstream impact for flood risk. So whether it is increasing ditches, whether it is adding more storm sewers, whether it's increasing curbs, those are all the variety of options that has been recommended through the various studies, and they will be prioritized and reviewed for applicability and placed into our capital program for the long term.
Thank you. Last question. You mentioned that it was a $37 million 10-year capital plan. I think all of us have been shocked in terms of the cost of infrastructure, how much it's gone up over the past year or two. Is that 37 a recent costing, or are we going to be in for a bit of a shock at budget time?
Through Mr. Chair, the cost that was included in our recent 10-year capital plan is the cost estimate that we have to our best knowledge of last year around June time. So I think as everyone's witnessing further increase in our construction cost, that staff will continue to ensure that we have appropriate funding and dollars in our capital plan. And hence, that's why we need to look at this strategy that's beyond the 10 years to really plan out the financial strategy to maintain our rainwater infrastructure over the long term.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Commissioner, I'm looking at page 37 and 38 with regards to the Lake Ontario level research and the plan 2014, and Mayor Burton and I have been over this plan more than a few times with regards to the IGCD Joint Commission and how they balance the flows of water, and I guess as Halton Region's representative to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, I'll be attending the conference in late June, and I'm wondering what advocacy you may see that we as the town of Oakville should be pushing forward, or even at the region of Halton. What should we be pushing forward here? Because it says in your report, we won't know till Q1, Q2 about the results of looking back at the 2014 plan. But again, not to cut to the chase, but I think Mayor Burton and I both have questions about the validity of that plan and the repercussions that came out of that plan. So is there any advocacy that you think we should be making, or comments that should be brought forward on behalf of the town or even the region in June on behalf of the town for the plan for 2014?
Through Mr. Chair, excuse me. Related to Plan 2014, as per in the report, they are reviewing the plan itself, and there will be hopefully some reports coming out. In terms of the advocacy, we have conducted meetings with Conservation Halton related to Plan 2014, and they're also reviewing the applicability of 2014, how we manage high lake levels related to our harbors and shorelines. Recognizing that Plan 2014 is really to regulate the outflows from upstream and downstream for the water levels. The situation that we experienced the last few years, it's a combination of not just the regulation itself, but it's also because of the frequency of the rainfalls and the water levels. So there is a number of issues that are accumulated to our high lake levels. Certainly could get back to council related to what type of advocacy in terms of messaging, and we'll work with Conservation Halton to provide that for you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd appreciate that. And if you could bring forward a memo to myself and to my council colleagues as well, so that I can advocate on behalf of not just the town of Oakville, but the region of Halton at the end of June on issues that you think are germane to be brought up with regards to not just Plan 2014, but any other Great Lakes issues. I'm sure it would be much appreciated, and I know it would be appreciated by myself as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Commissioner, thank you very much for the comprehensive report. And most of my questions have been asked by my council colleagues. Just a couple of follow-ups and additional points. So from a timing perspective on the important educational component, the report's phase 2 is in 2023. So phase 3 is sometime in, I guess, later in 23. Is there work that can be done sooner around education and joint education in regards to what Halton Region offers that we could highlight beyond just updating the website?
Certainly, through you, Chair. We actually had a really productive meeting with Region of Halton on the same topic. And yes, it does not have to wait until the rainwater management strategy, the entire strategy is done for us to tackle the communication and education component of risk mitigation. And we certainly have wealth of information already on our website, and staff continuously updates information as we come across them. But to answer your question, we are reaching out with Region of Halton to have a coordinated approach to talk about flood mitigation at the property level and to help our residents to be more familiar with flood mitigation. And so we will do that earlier than 2023.
So thank you very much for that explanation, and that sounds very promising. My other question is just around best practice research. So yourself and your team are obviously have a great deal of access to consultants and your own expertise. Is there a component in phase 1, 2, or 3 where you are looking for more best-in-class processes that we may not have tapped into at this point? I mean, and it is, as you say in the report, this is a fast-moving, evolving, but a long journey. And I'm just wondering how we're capturing some of those best-in-class initiatives that are happening around the world as we experience higher temperatures and more precipitation.
Through Chair, through our phase 1 in the needs assessment, we have a number of foundational studies that has research on best practices in terms of stormwater management and risk management related to flood mitigation. Certainly in our phase 2 for prioritization, we will be conducting research on what's the best way to prioritize such infrastructure improvements from a cost benefit or risk approach perspective. And in phase 3, we will also be researching the best practices relating to financing strategy on how to provide us with sufficient sustainable financial strategy into the future. So to answer your question, throughout the project, we will be researching best practices pending on the specific topic that we are tackling, and it will be incorporated throughout the strategy.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the next phase being reported out, and thank you for your good work so far.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Commissioner Fu. The recent exercise, or the ongoing, shall I say, exercises pertaining to the Lakeshore Road West project that Councillor Chisholm and I and the mayor, having met with several people, whether it's Oakville Green or Carnation Park or other people, the whole topic of possible environmental, what shall I say, green infrastructure for dealing with stormwater management, drainage, especially along some of the larger corridors. Is this something that we're going to be coming up with going forward? I'm thinking there'll be other projects in the future similar to our Lakeshore Road West project. And it might be a perfect opportunity to sort of compare the two and to sort of set a plan going forward for the best, as you said, best practices given environmental concerns in terms of infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's a complicated process in terms of evaluating what is the best stormwater solution for a particular area or corridor. Recognizing that the Lakeshore West project did garner a lot of discussion about the different type of opportunities for improvement to provide more flood stormwater control and stormwater capacity. It was driven by fundamental studies, which was the townwide stormwater master plan, as well as the Coronation Park. I like to highlight, though, for every drainage system, in order to ensure we provide the best cost-effective benefit that are minimizing the risk, the combination of the infrastructure has to help each other. One single type of infrastructure cannot take on all of the water. So for example, we cannot build a really, really large ditch to take a 100-year storm because that was not the intent of that minor system. We do need to look at the major system to support it. So to answer your question as succinct as I can is really related to the fact that it's a complex system, and through the rainwater management strategy, we are prioritizing some of the recommendations from the fundamental studies, and we will look at the best practices and look at the most minimized risk piece and most cost benefit recommendations to move it forward for the long term. So I know I'm not answering your question directly. However, I just want to recognize that it's a complex system, and it's not, we always consider the green approach and the more environmentally friendly approach as stormwater management by default is to really ensure the control and the quality and the quantity control of our rainwater. And we always have the environment in mind.
Thank you. And I think that's a benefit, especially for those members of the public who may be watching this exchange, that's all part of the lens in which you use in assessing. And as you pointed out, and rightly so, each area has its own, what shall I say, challenges to deal with, and different areas present different, challenges going forward. The other thing I wondered about, and it sort of dovetails on the previous discussion with the deeper basements that we're currently experiencing in new builds. And I know Councillor Mayer has been very good about us having some advocacy of the building code. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity whereby through this process, we can get some really firm data in order to assist us in advocating at the provincial level the problems and the costs and the downfalls we're experiencing to our municipality as a result of some of these 9, 10, and 11-foot basements, especially when you're getting down into the water table closer to the lake. It's really putting a lot of constraint on the existing homeowners in the area. And I can appreciate it's hard for you and your department to sort of juggle accommodating old established neighborhoods with some of these newer challenges. So I just want to put a bee in your bonnet for that, or sort of a cursor for you to going forward. Maybe if we can capture that, that would be great. So as I say, it could help us with our advocacy component. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm is back, right?
Thank you, Worship. I won't take very much time up on this one. I think we've covered a lot of the issues and challenges, especially in wards 1 and 2 with respect to floodplain and the drainage issues we have. And just for council's edification is that what is happening in areas where we're having a lot of infilling, we have existing ditches which over the years have created a lot of sediment, and people have landscape and hardscape on town right of ways and ditches and so forth. And unfortunately, the water can't go anywhere. There's no more degree pitch to move it down to the lake. And so we have all these challenges. And what has happened too is in my comments earlier saying when we dig deeper, the sump pumps pump it into the ditches and it's not going anywhere. So it's above and beyond what the capacity of those ditches were put in place in the 1960s. So that whole development by one home changing the grading or the pumping creates a linear problem with a lot of the homes of water not moving. So it's a really complex and issues that we have in our neighborhoods in West Oakville. Notwithstanding, Phoebe, I'm very happy with your comments about we look at the gray infrastructure versus the green infrastructure with respect to water, rainwater, and so forth. As you know, Lakeshore Road has been classified as a corridor of heritage and so forth, and we want to maintain that concept of that design as much as possible, with the idea that we need to balance between what's going to work for the next 50 years and what we can do to maintain the balance of the design and the location design of Lakeshore Road. So I'm quite pleased with that. Just under the microscope, that the heritage part of it, of that the road, Lakeshore Road West, is taken to a high consideration with respect to when we're doing the infrastructure for flood mitigation. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Would you also say that you'd be glad to move receipt of the report?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Is there any objection or further questions? Madam Clerk, seeing none, Councillor Chisholm's motion is successful and the report is received. We now come to the Oakville Enterprises Corporation quarterly update. And there's a presentation by Rob Lister, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Oakville Enterprises. Madam Clerk, would you figure out how to bring Mr. Lister in? There he is. Welcome, Mr. Lister. Council is looking forward to your presentation and your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Council. Yes, well, tonight I'm going to have one of my vice presidents, John Forshoe, give a presentation on Oakville Hydro's asset management system. John is the vice president of grid modernization and procurement. And we've had a number of discussions over the last number of months about reliability matters in Oakville and some of the storm issues and weather-related factors and non-related factors that we've had in the reliable supply of electricity. So I'm going to ask John to come forward, and he's going to take us through a very interesting presentation. So John, are you able to weigh in here?
Absolutely. I'm just trying to start my video. Can somebody start the video for me?
There we are. Yep, you're on.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you, Mayor Burton and councillors, for allowing me to present this evening. To start, I'd like to update council on conservation results from Earth Hour this past Saturday evening. So during Earth Hour, the town of Oakville saved approximately 16.2 megawatt hours, which is equivalent to turning off almost 1.1 million 15-watt light bulbs for an hour. So great results from the community. Next slide, please. So this evening, I'd like to illustrate how Oakville Hydro's asset management program, governed by the Ontario Energy Board, prioritizes investments in infrastructure renewal, maintenance, and grid modernization to deliver safe, reliable power to the community. Agenda topics will address how asset management prioritizes investments in Oakville, that residents' key priorities are identified through customer engagement, operational readiness, Oakville Hydro's service reliability, performance and measures, vegetation management and weatherproofing, how Oakville benefits from automation and grid modernization, and electrification of transportation. Next slide, please. Asset management is a systematic approach to collect and assess information to plan, prioritize, and optimize expenditure. Oakville Hydro's regulator, the Ontario Energy Board, requires electricity distributors to have a distribution system plan. A distribution system plan is the backbone of the Ontario Energy Board's approach to rate setting and ensures the regulated performance outcomes are achieved. The details provide the regulator insight into the utility's approach and practices related to asset management to support capital investment. Oakville Hydro's rolling 5-year investment program for the electricity distribution system across Oakville is prioritized through customer feedback and investment criteria in the areas of safety, customer and community, reliability, environment and sustainability, grid innovation, and public policy. Next slide, please. Consistent with direction from the Ontario Energy Board, electricity distributors must engage their customers on priority setting for investment planning. Oakville Hydro conducted surveys through a website called Have Your Say, oakvillehydro.ca, to establish Oakville customers' preferences for future investments in Oakville's electricity system. We heard from our customers and their priorities were clear: maintain rates, sustain reliability, and invest in new technologies and grid modernization. Next slide, please. Oakville Hydro crews maintain a constant state of readiness, as reliability of service is an important performance measure. Electricity grids are complex networks with equipment and assets interconnected across North America. Many issues can arise in operating an electricity distribution system, including planned and unplanned outages. Outages can come from lightning and other weather events, animal contact, fallen trees, equipment failure, and foreign interference, such as vehicle collisions. The impacts of weather-related events are increasing in frequency and intensity. Hardening the system to reduce the impact of weather events is built into the asset management program, modifying design practices and standards as the environment changes. Immediate response from the Control Room Operations Center to triage the outage, followed by efficient dispatching of response crews, helps keep Oakville Hydro's reliability strong. Next slide, please. Reliability of service is a standard benchmark for electric utility. These graphs represent Oakville Hydro's 5-year average annual reliability performance compared to a peer group of Ontario utilities and the provincial average. Outage duration is on the left and the number of outages on the right. Note, Oakville Hydro's performance is highlighted in red, and the lower the number, the better the reliability performance. Oakville's average outage duration per customer is 36 minutes per year, compared to over an hour for the peer group and over 2.5 hours for the province. Oakville's average number of outages per customer is less than 1 outage per year, compared to 1.2 for the peer group and 1.5 per year for the province. Outages can be seasonal, and at times there can be areas of town that experience interruptions that exceed the average local customer. Various neighborhoods that are supplied from heavily treated areas from time to time experience clusters of increased outages. Fortunately, through our control center, the impacts of an outage can be significantly reduced by isolating the outage to a smaller area. However, initially, some customers may experience a momentary interruption. Next slide, please. Power line maintenance continues to be one of Oakville Hydro's top priorities, and maintaining vegetation around the assets is an important tool for providing reliable power. Vegetation in proximity can interfere with high voltage lines and increases the probability for animal contact. During high wind events, trees and limbs close to lines can make contact, causing lines to short circuit, leaving customers without power. Good utility practices provide a 3-meter clearance between branches and high voltage power lines and 1-meter clearance for low voltage lines. Maintaining appropriate clearances is vital to weatherproofing and can reduce the impact of vegetation-related outages. The town of Oakville provides tree trimming services annually for Oakville Hydro. Next slide, please. Last year, system automation allowed Oakville Hydro to avoid more than 2.7 million customer outage minutes, significantly reducing the duration of outages and impacts to customers. These results were achieved thanks to the prevalence of network switches available for remote operation from the control room. Oakville Hydro's asset management process incorporates advanced technologies and automation when replacing critical assets, building grid modernization into core practices. To bolster reliability, Oakville Hydro installed a self-healing network in Oakville's downtown core. Newly installed local equipment detects the fault, isolates the issue, and automatically reroutes power to restore service to customers. This advanced technology is complemented by system-wide automation capabilities and grid intelligence. Next slide, please. The Government of Canada has set a mandatory target for all new light-duty cars and passenger truck sales to be zero emission by 2035. Vehicle manufacturers across the world are switching to battery-based platforms. Oakville is home to over 2,800 EV owners. As electric vehicle adoption increases, Oakville Hydro continues to assess the needs of our customers and the impact to the grid. By monitoring power flows and performing grid scenario simulations, Oakville Hydro engineers adjust infrastructure and evolve design standards to meet the growing electric needs of customers. These simulations will ensure that Oakville Hydro's electricity grid is prepared for the electrification of transportation. Next slide, please. Oakville Hydro is relocating infrastructure for Metrolinx to support the electrification of the GO Rail network in Oakville. So far, Oakville Hydro has completed 8 utility relocations to eliminate conflicts with the proposed electrification infrastructure. There are 2 relocations in progress at Royal Windsor Drive and Maple Grove Drive, with another 2 awaiting construction start at Chartwell Road and McPherson Road. Next slide, please. Oakville Hydro continues to invest in our electricity system for reliable power. Closing, Oakville Hydro's investment program is guided by customer preferences aligned with the Ontario Energy Board's regulatory framework. Reliability continues to be a top priority, and Oakville Hydro's modern grid is evolving for the future. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Mr. Mayor. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for a great presentation, and you've generated questions. Councillor Adams is first. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. On slide 6 of your update, you show outages that people are experiencing. The definition of outages, does that include momentary outages that occur where in effect, your lights flicker, everything shuts down in your house, and then half a second later it pops back up again?
Yeah, so the industry term more accurately would be interruptions. So there's momentary interruptions and sustained interruptions. And typically what people would consider momentary would be a flicker, like you mentioned, and a sustained interruption, which is an interruption that lasts a minute or more, would be considered an outage.
Okay, so the slide that you showed on slide 6, that showed us having less than 1 outage per customer per year. That doesn't include those momentary flickers. You have to be out for at least a minute before that gets counted.
That's correct. Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification. Thanks again for the update.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may add to answering that question, Councillor Adams, when you're comparing statistics across the different utilities in the province, a number of the smaller utilities don't have the capability to actually measure the momentaries. So when you, or even some of the interruptions at all. So one always has to be a little bit mindful of the numbers that get presented in terms of when looking at the smaller utilities, just mostly due to the technical capability of capturing the actual outage.
Yes, I thank you very much for that clarification. I merely wish to ensure that we didn't have any dissonance from our residents who might be watching and who say, but wait, I get flickers all the time or more frequently than once a year kind of thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, John, for the presentation. I was happy to just watch it go by until the very end where you mentioned the work you're doing with Metrolinx. And of course, that brings up some questions to me. So McPherson Drive, I think you said, is that the Burl Oak underpass? Or could you maybe just let us know what work you have done as of date on the Burl Oak grade separation and the Kerr Street grade separation? I'd be interested to know in what Oakville Hydro has done on those two projects that Metrolinx has obviously made some decisions about lately.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. We haven't done any relocation work specifically related to the grade separation. We have been in discussions with municipal and regional authorities around the project, but the relocations that I'm mentioning are not related to the underpass.
So you haven't had any conversations or any discussions about any of the work with either of those two underpasses as of yet?
No, our engineering team has been involved, through you, Mr. Mayor. But the actual relocation work has not progressed, and we wouldn't be at we don't have a design at this point either.
Okay, and from your perspective, you have not, you're not planning in the future, you have nothing on the works going forward about those two underpasses right now? Everything's on a hold from Oakville Hydro standpoint. Is that what I'm to understand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would be, so I'm not intimately involved with the projects, but we would be, anytime that we're approached with any asset relocations, we would engage in discussions. But related to those two projects, those two underpasses, we have not completed any designs or proceeded with any work.
So then I guess just lastly, I appreciate that. Maybe you can give us an update from Oakville Hydro's perspective on where you are with regards to electrification of the lines for Metrolinx.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Metrolinx project that we're working on is the first phase, is eliminating conflicts with the proposed Metrolinx infrastructure. So that's what we're working on today. There will be, subsequent phases of the project where we may be required to provide power, but at this point, that's not the phase that we're working on.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Thanks for keeping the lights on. We appreciate it. Phil. Question is, peer utilities. Who do you compare yourselves to? Like the graph was pretty impressive, but when you say the peer utilities, who got a few examples of who they would be?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. Burlington, Energy Plus, Integris, Hydro Ottawa, London, Waterloo North would be a number of them.
Appreciate that. Thank you. That's good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to you, Mr. Forshaw, through the mayor. I'm interested in the whole issue around right-sizing infrastructure for the, I guess, new technologies around EVs, and even for that matter, electric energy for heating. And this probably doesn't involve the local utility, but certainly I think you'd know about it from an industry perspective. Is there any talk about changing building code or ESA code around increasing baseline amperages for homes so that they're able to accommodate these new loads that are being required for EVs and electric furnaces and those sorts of things?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor. So we are aware that it is a requirement for new residential services to prepare for electric vehicle adoption. So there needs to be space on the incoming service to accommodate a future EV. Apart from that, I know that the engineering team is working with condo boards throughout Oakville on some of the challenges associated with EV charging for multi-unit residential buildings. But that would be the extent that we would be involved in.
Are you aware of any regulatory changes that might impact home construction? Because I know that most homes are built with a 100 amp service, and as things are changing, 100 amps just isn't sufficient without load sharing in order to accommodate a lot of the new things that are being, again, if you have one EV, you can probably get away with it. If you have two, you can't. If you're installing heat pumps or electric furnaces, you're certainly going to be maxing it out and having to get yourself involved in load sharing. So is there any move towards any kind of codes changing to accommodate? And two, how is Oakville Hydro planning for the future when it comes to that in subdivisions and even within existing built up areas in the community?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the majority of new services that we're seeing in new subdivisions, regardless of whether it's a townhome or a detached home, typically they're being installed with 200 amp services now.
Oh,
so
good.
It seems that the builders are preparing for EV adoption, and I think that's what homeowners would be looking for as well. As for regulatory changes, wouldn't be. I'll have to get back to you on that, Mr. Knoll, Councillor Knoll, because I can't think of any regulatory changes that would be kind of in place right now or upcoming regarding that, but I can get back to you on that. But regarding our preparation for EVs, we have a very modern and robust network, and in most areas there are multiple points of supply. So energy flows are constantly monitored in the control center. So if there are increased energy needs of the community, we're well suited to make small adjustments to accommodate the need.
So without pushing too far or getting too technical, are the pad transformers able to accommodate such large loads simultaneously, should that ever come to pass in terms of EV adoption? So if a typical charger, home charger is 40 amps, 25 to 40 amps, if you've got more than half the residents on a pad transformer generating that kind of or demanding that sort of load, are we able to accommodate that?
Through Mr. Mayor, we haven't had any challenges to date, and that's part of the simulations that we're running.
Okay.
The interesting thing about EV adoption and EV penetration rates is if someone had a crystal ball that could predict when everyone's going to charge, that would really be helpful for us. So if you have that, please let us know. I'll
work on it for you.
Okay, thank you. But we're looking at all the various scenarios, and we haven't come across challenges today. But we are looking forward into the future to see what the community needs, and we'll adapt accordingly.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Worship. Good evening, Mr. Lister and Mr. Forshaw. Thank you so much for the update. My question is about the grid modernization, and perhaps I'm missing a point here, but is there an interrelationship between the local and the provincial end of things? And are we limited at all by aging provincial infrastructure and the like?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There certainly is an interconnection, and actually a physical interconnection. The constraints today that exist are actually around the ability to connect distributed resources. There's two Hydro One owned transformer stations within Oakville that we actually can't connect distributed resources to. And although the penetration levels for distributed resources today is very low, that could create a constraint in the future.
Thank you. And is there a strategy to work that out somehow?
We're working with Hydro One. We're communicating with them to identify if there's anything that we can do on the distribution side to eliminate some of the constraints. But we haven't concluded on that yet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Mayor Burton, thank you for the presentation. And just as an aside, thank you for all the work trying to help us inform the Southeast residents about outages, which were a little bit more than what you quoted as an average, but we made our way through it, and we thank you for your help. In terms of customer service, there was some implementation that was coming forward around communication of outages and being able to get more real-time responsive feedback to the customer. Have any of those initiatives been implemented in the last quarter? I'm thinking about text to customers, updating the website, because there's some challenges with somebody having to multitask with getting it up on the site, but also responding to inquiries. So can you give us a little insight into anything that's advanced in that area?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. So we are still working on implementing the text and email outage updates. So what we're working towards is for customers to be able to subscribe to receive an email or text notification in the event of an unplanned outage. We're just working through the final technical aspects of that program now, and we're hoping to have it released this quarter or early next quarter.
Thanks very much. I look forward to that, and I hopefully people all do sign up so they're not in the dark, as they say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazard-Thiel, would you be good enough to move receipt of the information? Thank you. Is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, seeing none, the motion carries and the report is received. And thank you, Mr. Forshay and Mr. Lister. Great seeing you, and we'll have you back in a quarter.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. All right, now, Council, if you turn to the 2022 priority intergovernmental requests, and we have Suraj Mann, our Manager of Corporate Strategy, and Julie Clark, the Director of Strategy, Policy, and Communications. And the motion is that you approve the 2022 priority intergovernmental requests that are identified in Appendix A. And I want to say, as an introduction to this, that I've always wanted us to do this. We do this at the Regional Halton, and I think it's very important, especially now that we have an election in front of us, that we know what we're hoping the various candidates for office need to know about what the town wants and needs. So Suraj, we're all ears. If you have, do you have a presentation? If not, we'll start questions. And I see some interesting questions. What have you got, Suraj? You do have something. Excellent. Away you go.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. We are here tonight to provide Council with an overview of a list of recommended priority intergovernmental requests that is asked that the town has of other levels of government, including provincial, federal, and regional governments. The purpose of bringing this to Council is to ensure there is alignment on what these priority requests are and how they tie into other strategic directions. Next slide, please. Tonight's presentation will be around 7 minutes to ensure there's appropriate time for discussion and questions. And because the areas related to these 18 requests are relatively well known to Council and to residents. We'll first explain the background of why we're bringing this forward at this time before getting into the strategic context around these asks. That is why they're important, and then proceed into an overview of what the specific requests are. Some of the requests are very detailed, and we would refer to Appendix A for the full text. Next slide, please. As background, we'd like to start by noting that the leadership efforts of the community, the mayor, and members of Council have led to a number of achievements that demonstrate the value of engaging other levels of government in a productive way. Some examples here include the avoidance of a forced amalgamation of Halton municipalities in 2019, the conservation of the Glen Abbey Golf Course lands in 2021, and funding for electric buses totaling almost $50 million. At the same time, it was recognized that to pursue the town's vision and growth targets, a more systematic approach is needed to focus and align intergovernmental requests to the town's priorities, which are set out through a few strategic elements. For instance, Vision 2057, the town's roadmap for the future, notes that the strategic plan sets the direction for all town plans, in line with the town's three fundamental elements: our vision to be the most livable town in Canada, our mission, and our values. And last year, through the refresh of Council's strategic plan, priorities were also identified or reaffirmed within the 5 areas of focus from the strategic plan: livability, engaged community, accountable government, mobility, and environment. At the same time, the town is also undergoing an official plan review to review and align the town's land use policies and to ensure conformity with provincial legislation and policies, including the requirement to forecast growth to 2051 as per the provincial growth plan, as well as the Region of Halton official plan as amended through the regional official plan review. As a result, now is a timely opportunity to set into policy the community's vision for how the town will develop and to provide other levels of government with guidance on what is needed to realize that vision. Next slide, please. Based on the previous, and after consultation with the town's executive management team, it was recognized that a coordinated approach to intergovernmental requests would help direct future actions and strengthen partnerships with all governments, as well as support efforts to collaborate and align with other municipalities, networks, associations, organizations, and tables. So to advance the town's priority needs, especially on infrastructure, on funding, and on the right policy and regulatory framework, activities to further intergovernmental relations were recognized as needed. Specifically, 18 areas for requests have been outlined in this report in detail. The next slide will talk a little more about the overview of those requests, but broken down by the relevant area of focus from the strategic plan. We'll just call out a couple here to explain why these are strategically important before getting into the specific asks. For instance, for Midtown Oakville, as one of the 3 urban growth centers for Halton, delivering infrastructure to advance the development of Midtown will address current provincial and regional growth forecasts and policies, including the plan for growth to 2051, and provide clearer direction about the future look and feel of Midtown. And on courts, taxation, and financial tools. Collectively, addressing issues related to these 3 areas will help alleviate pressures on municipal finances and inspire public confidence through open, accountable, and efficient delivery of government services. And for electric buses, green buildings, and rainwater management, addressing these issues will further the creation of a climate change resilient community and the transition to a low carbon future. Additional elements like the town's economic development strategy, the advocacy efforts of the Ontario Auto Mayors, the town's COVID-19 recovery action plan, the town's digital Oakville plan, and others also set out the importance of a number of the other pieces that are listed here. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary overview of the more detailed requests that are the core of this report. Again, the specific language is in the appendix, but we can expand on a few of the ones that are summarized in this table. For example, for community infrastructure, the ask is to build schools at an appropriate funding level as development requires, particularly elementary and high schools in North Oakville, as well as to build a new courthouse in Oakville to address increased caseloads, and to expand Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital to address growing healthcare needs. On the topic of transit, the request is to provide continued transit infrastructure and funding to support population and employment growth, reduce gridlock, connect communities, and improve people's access to jobs, housing, healthcare, and education. And that several initiatives be endorsed as the Town of Oakville's priority transit initiatives as listed. For instance, Trafalgar BRT, Dundas BRT, Palermo Terminal, and others. Another example on expansion of the Greenbelt involves a request to include the urban river valley system as part of the Greenbelt. Again, details on the specific intergovernmental requests for the rest are listed in Appendix A. This list at this time provides the initial basis for intergovernmental relations and to help focus efforts over the coming year and will be subject to review and updating on an ongoing basis. At the same time, staff is also preparing briefs on these requests on a priority basis to support members of council and the executive management team in conversations and meetings that are expected to happen with representatives of other levels of government. Next slide, please. Having shared this list of intergovernmental requests, we're happy to address any questions or hear any comments as we bring forward the recommendation that the priority intergovernmental requests identified in Appendix A of this report be approved. Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. You've generated a few, and we'll start with Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the presentation, Suraj. I think it was really insightful. One of the things that as I looked at the appendix and looked at all the kind of different issues that are out there, is there a way of kind of creating a matrix of who the asks are to, and then who are we aligned with or not necessarily aligned with, be it Halton Region, other municipalities, be it, you know, automotive municipalities that have automotive centers in it. It's mentioned in there, but it doesn't put it into a matrix of, you know, how many times are you asking the federal or the provincial, and who's aligned with us as we're asking. So it kind of puts it into, I would call like a stakeholder matrix, if you will, so that we can visualize how many times are we asking, you know, which level of government for what, how are they interconnected, not only issue wise, but then with the municipalities that we'd be working with or other jurisdictions, be it conservation authorities, et cetera. You know, who are the other stakeholders that we'd be working with in order to get those, you know, asks looked at and then, you know, ultimately approved.
Through you, Your Worship, thank you for the comment and the suggestion, Councillor Longo. I would say that the briefs that are being prepared do highlight some of those more details about who the level of government that the specific request is targeted towards. But we can certainly take that feedback about kind of turning that into a matrix or a table. As mentioned previously, this is, you know, it's expected to be updated on an ongoing basis and refined and reviewed. So we can certainly take that back and endeavor to incorporate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. I can imagine that being useful to residents so they know which candidate to take things to in election season or election year, as we're going to have to call this. Councillor O'Meara, you're next.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Swaraj, for the presentation. I'm wondering if you've heard anything about the Brawny Provincial Park. I've heard nibbles around both sides, whether it be the Brawny Road and Upper Middle area, desires to have it changed into a number of things, and also on the Burl Oak side with regards to the exorbitant amount of parking spaces and not a lot of usage to the defunct pool and a number of things. Is there anything in our mandate or in our vision about what we would do or wouldn't do, or what we might be advocating for if the province decides to hive off a little bit more than what is the green space there, but a little more of the you know, I guess, urbanized aspects? Have we got any thoughts or any position on that?
Through Your Worship, thank you, Councillor O'Meara. I don't have that information at this time, but we can certainly connect at the commission level and at the departmental level to get more details about that and circle back.
Yeah, that'd be great if we've got any thoughts from a staff perspective on that. I've heard a lot of low sort of humming about, you know, an exorbitant amount of space on both sides of there. That's not, you know, green area, it's actually urbanized area, and what we may do with it. So if the town had a position on that, I think it'd be good before it happens rather than do it reactively. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm glad to see that the grade separations are high priorities with respect to the intergovernmental context. My suggestion is this, and I think it's in relation to the other comments, who the players are that we're in contact with. That, to me, that's an interesting and a good way of knowing and understanding how that process works. Because at the end of the day, staff go back and are working with their counterparts at the province or the feds and so forth. We really don't have any connection. Not looking for it to be in the weeds, but understanding what's happening, and that maybe, as you said, that brief might clarify or give us a little bit more information. But I think that's important to know who the players are, so we can have an understanding moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Quite often we ask for a timeline as to when things can be done, but I'm wondering if, as we know who the players are, we can ask for a timeline for how long things have been taking, especially with the bus rapid transit. We've been promised that for over, I think, 20 years now. And I think that it's important that we see just how long it's taking for the other areas of government to get back to us on what is a great list of high priority topics that interest all of us. And in summing up, just want to say I appreciate the inclusion of transit. I was having a conversation with a potential provincial candidate this weekend about how, it's true that 15 buses can get about 600 cars off our street. And generally, a lot of people believe that that's true. Like, we need more buses, we need to get more people on buses. But when it comes down to the practicality of it, people just don't want to get on a bus if they can't find the way of getting there. So the bus rapid transit, all the other projects you're proposing here as a high priority, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Grant. Councillor Hazlitt-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I have two questions, and one may be answered by the mayor more so, but does our frustrations with the land tribunal system, should it fall into this set of intergovernmental requests? I'm not sure who'd answer that.
Through your worship, I can perhaps start there. We can certainly take that feedback and discuss further with the Office of the Mayor and Council, as well as the executive management team, about to what extent that should be included in the next iteration of this. But certainly appreciate that that's a hot topic and an important consideration for the town. So we can take that back for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. And not that I think it's the most important thing by any stretch on this list, but when I read the automated speed enforcement, it doesn't resonate to me that the key message is we shouldn't have to go into debt in order to run these automated speed enforcement cameras. Everybody seems to think we're going to make money on it, and we lose money on the ticket, and we can't even use them to their capability. So if that's what's understood in terms of the advocacy, great. But as I read it, I was like, it's as simple as figure out the administration. This is ridiculous cost to be able to do something that we know can make a difference, and municipalities shouldn't have to bear that cost.
Councillor, I'm pretty sure staff have a pretty good handle on that. After all, our source of information about there being this problem is our staff. So I'm confident they're not going to forget. But thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for this comprehensive list. Particularly appreciate the fact that the courthouse issue has been raised once again there, and I appreciate your advocacy on our behalf with that, Your Worship. That's an important issue, and we can't ever let that one slip off the radar. The one issue that I'm wondering if it's appropriate, like Councillor Hazlitt-Deal raised another issue, I'm going to raise the issue of affordable housing. Since that is probably the #1 issue on everybody's minds these days, should that not be captured here somewhere? Especially in light of the, how could I put it, lackluster report from the task force that the province delivered?
Through your worship, housing prices are certainly a hot topic, and thank you for your question and comment, Councillor Knoll. That's true nationally and certainly provincially, and it's a complex topic. I think part of the thinking here was that through addressing the growth targets and by conforming through the growth plan, both provincially and regionally, that the town does have a role to play in the complex ecosystem that is the housing market. And by highlighting Midtown as an example, as one of the priority areas, that does take into consideration how that designated area as one example will help achieve some of the targets on that front. But we can take that feedback back about sort of the housing market and the affordability issue more broadly.
Thank you for that. But I do I just want to state that one of the concerns I have, and I certainly heard this expressed at the region, is that the affordability issue is not just about growth, and it's not just about housing supply and the number of building permits. It talks about a number of other fairly significant policy considerations, things like foreign investment, vacant housing, taxation around vacant housing, etc. So I think it's a bigger issue than supply and building permits and the Planning Act, which is essentially what the Provincial Housing Task Force was essentially boiling it all down to. So I really think that there is some role the municipality can play, certainly from an advocacy perspective, to help push this boulder back up the hill, because it certainly is going to be top of mind in pretty much every household in our community, especially as our children continue to have to look north, south, east, and west to find housing that's just not available here at an affordable rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Sandhu.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and I appreciate you seeing my hand with my colorful background. I just wanted to echo Councillor Knoll's comment, and I think it's more of a comment, quite frankly, Mr. Mon, instead of it actually being a question for you. But I always find, and I've made this comment numerous times in meetings with staff and at council, that Oakville doesn't particularly act like the rest of the market when we're talking about real estate. So if we're looking at affordability generally across the board in Canada, I realize that the Bank of Canada's interest rate has made an impact to how things are affordable in Canada and across Oakville, but we're almost recession proof. I think if you speak to any real estate agent in the area, they'll also talk about how the market continues to increase in Oakville, and we don't necessarily see the dips that we see in other places. I don't think that that's due to the fact that we don't have enough housing available in Oakville. Ward 7 is a clear attestation to that. There are new houses being built every single day, and many of that being very high density. So I don't think that that's our only lever here. I think the expectation, at least from a council perspective, is for us to be able to advocate and indicate that specifically for Oakville. I don't know if that's across the board, across the province, or even across the country, but certainly we are not in the same situation as everybody else. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Haslett-Deal, are you coming back for seconds here? No, okay. Commissioner Closey has risen. I think she wants to add something here, and at the appropriate time, I have a suggestion. I just want to float. There's three things that I'm going to suggest Council not only approve this report, but that Council add three things to the list for staff to develop representation for us on these. And I don't think we need to go into detail on them because staff are well aware of our collective opinions on these things. CAO Closey.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just wanted to add that I think on the affordable housing question, it should be one that I would hope Council would request us to add to the list on the priority. I think it will take us a little bit of time, though, to flush out that briefing note because, as Councillor Sandhu has said, and certainly Councillor Knoll, the complexities around affordable housing are quite significant, and it will take us some time to really begin to articulate what are those requests specifically that would then enable us to flush out that briefing note. But at least to have it on that list of asks is, I think, important at this point in time.
Thank you, Madam CAO. So, Council, what I would suggest is that someone move the recommendation that the requests be approved and add that staff develop requests on assisting the town in acquiring parkland to keep up with growth, assisting the town with measures that will work around affordable and, I would add, assisted housing, which I think is part of the spectrum. And third, assisting the town in, if not abolishing, then reforming the OLT to make it fairer to our residents and everyone considered in the matters before the OLT. And on the affordable housing, there's sort of two branches. We need and staff are developing a report for a future council meeting. And on the our opinion of the recommendations of the Housing Affordability Task Force. So there's that piece of the affordable housing. Let me call it our effort to defend ourselves from some mistaken ideas. And then the other branch is what really would work and that what we really want. And the first one, I think, is easier and sooner done than the second one. The second one, I think, is going to take us some work. And I'll be putting an opportunity in front of council very soon to begin that work. Councillor Grant, I saw your hand first, so you're up. Are you moving all that? Thank you very much.
Yes, yes, I am.
Anyone else want to speak to it or add anything? Is there any objection to Councillor Grant's motion? Councillor Chisholm.
Your worship, I don't have any concerns with the motion, but I sometimes get really, I guess, concerned and when we use the word affordable housing, and it's more than it's not a housing, it's not a house. And a lot of people are I guess misinformed that they think we're always talking about affordable houses or housing, and it's more than that. It's affordable access to living spaces and so forth, whether it be rental or buying or some kind of other arrangements. So I just want to be clear, and I don't know where that falls in, but this affordable housing to me is not clear, and with respect to what the intent is with the government with their recommendations do, I get a little concerned.
Councillor, I assure you that staff and we on council fully understand the multiple dimensions of the word housing. And we all use the word as a shorthand, because otherwise we're reading off a list of things when we're just trying to say something else. So please accept my assurance that we all understand what we're talking about there. Councillor Knoll.
I just want to pick up on that just for one moment. And you already articulated this in your phrasing of the changes to that to the staff report, and that is, while I do believe that the continuum of housing clearly identifies all stages of housing, I think there needs to be a clear delineation between the reference to affordable and subsidized housing, because it's been a confusion for years. And you articulated that, and that if there's one thing I would love to send back to the province, and that would be let's create a common sense of a common set of nomenclature so we can be clear on that, because they continually confuse that terminology as well. And I noticed the regional staff had called that out in their really good report that we just dealt with last week at the regional council. So thank you for raising that, and I just wanted to make that statement as well with respect to the subsidized piece.
Thank you, and I want to just to be really precise about it. I also understand that we all include rental, not just purchase, when we talk about affordability. We represent everybody, not just home buyers. So thank you very much for that. So that's moved by Councillor Grant. We've had a great discussion. I know staff has benefited from that. Mr. Mann, thank you very much for a great report. It's been much anticipated and long wanted. Is there any objection to Councillor Grant's motion? Madam Clerk, there is none. Councillor Grant's motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Grant. Council, if we're coming on to 2 hours, and I could offer you a break, or we could hear from the CAO with her recovery update, and then have a break before the former hospital lands. What's your pleasure? You don't?
After the CAO?
Perhaps you don't have a preference.
No, I'd say after the CAO also.
After the CAO, all right. Madam CAO, 9.4, recovery update, please and thank you.
Mayor, members of council, I'll be relatively short. You have the report on the recovery update with the changes that have happened both at the provincial level in terms of taking off the masking and the physical distancing as example requirements that's happened just lately, and the future changes that will be coming at towards the end of April, we expect, as well as the removal of or the termination of the emergency declaration for the town of Oakville. We need to constantly review what changes we need to make in our practices going forward. So as a result of the termination of the emergency declaration, we looked at all the bylaws that were associated with that declaration because they would sunset as a result of that. The listing of those bylaws are part of this report. I think they're in the appendices. There are two bylaws that we do need to reinstate. One is to allow the property standards group to continue to meet virtually, and the second is to review what we should be doing with the suspension of the taxis, their age element. So both of those reports will be coming back to you in April in terms of what we need to do with those two bylaws. So that deals with changes relative to the declaration of emergency being terminated. The second area is in relation to the masking and the physical distancing. So one aspect that we needed to look at, and it is a recommendation of this report, is that we consider coming back into the council chambers. We had discussed this at the last meeting of council. The recommendation is that we come back on April the 25th for that council meeting. It gives staff an opportunity to clean the facility here to make sure we're all good in attending, make some very minor changes in order to welcome council back into the council chambers. It would be a hybrid meeting, and we'd continue a hybrid into the future. So really it presents an option to councillors if they want to attend in person or or not remotely. Either would work, and we're looking at making changes to the way that meeting is actually displayed on the public forum. So the recommendation in front of you tonight is to return to the council chambers on April the 25th for that hybrid meeting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam CAO. Questions? How about a motion then? Councilor O'Meara, thank you very much. Is there an objection to the motion? There being none, Madam Clerk, that carries. And now that you've been working for almost 2 hours, and I'm told it's best practice in all meetings to have a little bio break, how about we resume at 8:30? We'll be right back. Thank you. Hello, and I'm going to call the meeting back to order, and I hope everybody had a good break. And we will take up where we left off with item 9.5, the former hospital lands update. And we have Ryan Maynard and Doug Carr and Jim Knighton available. And this is, I guess, the recommendation just to help the public if any are watching on YouTube. This has a companion confidential report, which we will be considering later at the end of the meeting. This is the action here is that the Oakville Municipal Development Corporation be requested to market and seek out opportunities for the redevelopment of a portion of the former Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital site, identified as the Seniors Block, Civic Square, and former Oakville Trafalgar High School building, which we're going to collectively call the property here now. Number two, that staff be delegated authority to complete the sale of the property based on recommendations from the Municipal Development Corporation, provided all the conditions set out in this report and the confidential staff report dated March 15th entitled Confidential Former Hospital Lands Update on the Seniors Block, March 28th, from the legal department, are satisfied to the satisfaction of the CAO and the town solicitor. And third, that the OMDC be paid a management fee of 1.5% of the purchase price for its work marketing and securing a buyer for the property upon successful completion of the transaction. Council, do you have questions or do you want to proceed to a motion? Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Mayor Burton, I do have questions. If there's a presentation, I'm prepared to be patient, but I do have some questions.
Let me see. Considering that you have a confidential and a public report, do you have questions about the public report? Okay, well then, the aforementioned staffers are standing by, and you have the floor, and it's in order for you to ask your questions.
Thank you. I understand that this will go through site plan control. Is there going to be language in the deal that speaks to compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood? And in particular, sensitivity to the heritage. I mean, they're required to protect the heritage of Old OT, but compatibility with it and the community around it.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Carr, would you like to field it? I mean, you probably don't need my advice, but you might want to start with the fact that the town has already put planning on the site with those things in mind.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly what I was going to suggest, but I wonder if Mr. Maynard could elaborate on that point if he's available.
Mr. Maynard, welcome.
Mr. Chair. So it would be similar to what we've done on the residential subdivision, where they will have to go through site plan control, and at that point we will be putting in the controls that you're speaking to as to consistency with the neighborhood, and they'll have to deal with the heritage issues as well.
Okay, so will this be similar to what happened on the Chisholm lands, or the similar was put in place for Brantwood or McDonald Allen? Because they were slightly different, and the McDonald Allen had a stronger approach to architectural controls.
So through you, Mr. Chair, on the Chisholm site, we had a set zoning and everything was set, so they didn't have any room to change. Here, the zoning hasn't been put in place yet, so there will be time for staff and council to see it when it comes through for that.
Okay. So we will, okay. So we'll have, so for clarity, the zoning that will go in, we will be able to make sure that they can't exceed the setbacks, et cetera.
Yes.
All right. My other question is just in terms of medium density, can you just, for clarity, because not everybody understands all the planning. So it says senior oriented medium density, and that refers to either independent living or assisted living for seniors. What kind of what kind of unit count would we be looking at potentially on medium density?
Is Gabe Charles here able to answer that? Sorry, I'm not able to answer the unit count question.
Thanks, Ryan. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The density on the site is medium density, which is between 30 and 50 units per hectare. So based on the size of the property, we'd be looking at probably around 30 independent units. There wouldn't be a density limit in terms of the assisted living units.
Thank you for that. And my other question is just on point 7 about the parking. So that would clarify that they are not to share parking garage with the community center?
For you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. They will not be using the parking garage. That's just for the community center.
Okay, I fibbed. I did have one other question. On the Civic Square, you specifically say that it would be open space available for community events. Assuming that there's going to be park benches or things like that in and around the Civic Square, that would be public use, or would it only be for community events?
The Civic Square would be open to the public. So it would be privately owned, but we would retain a public easement so that it would be open for public use.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarity, as Councillor Hazelfield was saying, this is putting into effect the rather exhaustive hospital land study. This is the final piece of it, which allows us to move forward with the master plan, correct?
For you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. This is the last remaining piece of the master plan.
And our chimney swifts are being looked after still, correct?
Yes, that's correct. They will have to look after the chimney swifts in the building.
Good stuff. Be happy to move that at the appropriate time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giddings. Is there an objection to Councillor Giddings' motion? Madam Clerk, seeing none, Councillor Giddings' motion is carried. Now, let me just given that decision, could I ask Councillor Giddings or anyone else to move receipt of the confidential former hospital lands update on the seniors block?
I'd be happy to do so, Mr. Mayor, if there are no other questions.
Thank you,
from my
Councillor. Is there an objection? Madam Clerk, there not being an objection, that too is carried. That brings us to well, let's see. So now we're trying to make sure that we do confidential things at the very end and all the public things before. So I'd like to take things out of order, but but it's not too radical. At 10.4, the citizen appointment to the Oakville Public Library Board and the Community Spirit Awards Selection Committee. We have a motion, and I believe that Councillor Knoll is willing to move it, that a determination regarding the current vacancies on the Oakville Public Library Board be deferred to allow the CEO of Oakville Library Board the opportunity to assess and rank applications based on the board-approved skills matrix and to provide to the clerk's department provide that to the clerk's department for a further report to the June 20th council meeting. Councillor Knoll has moved it, and that is in order. Are there questions? And if there are none, is there any objection to the motion? And there being none, Madam Clerk, that carries. Now, we also need a motion that the vacancy on the Community Spirit Awards Committee be filled as recommended by Julie Pennell, the current chair of the Community Spirit Awards. Is that motion, Councillor Chisholm, thank you for moving that. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that is carried. So now we have under new business a matter moved by Councillor Chisholm and seconded by Councillor Robertson concerning the grade separation issue. And I'm going to ask if we could get a mover and seconder to waive procedure to consider this matter tonight. Councillor Haslett-Deal and Councillor Elger, thank you for that. Any objection to that motion? There being none, that's unanimous and that carries. And now, Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Robertson, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Worship, the opportunity to speak to the motion. I know this is the top of mind for everybody in the last month, knowing full well the announcement we've got from Metrolinx, and very disconcerting to all, especially with our neighbors and our BIA and surrounding areas of the concerns about not having it. I guess the point I want to make, I think it's very clear on the emotion, and it just mirrors what happened at the region. I think that was a unanimous vote there too at the region. What the concern we have, Councillor Duddick and ourselves, this has been going on for many years. It becomes a very high risk safety issue with respect to the crossings and the increased traffic and so forth, and is growing exponentially. And as you're probably all aware, there's a traffic light less than 100 feet away from the tracks, which it is in sync with the traffic on the rail. But however, it is a dangerous situation, and I understand, and I can be corrected on this, Your Worship. I understand the grade separation for Kerr Street will happen once the electrification. So I understand that, but it's taking aside from that, that this has always been a very high risk area, no matter if we're doing electrification or not. It's just become a real difficulty. And it's an integral part of the whole development on the Spears Kerr Street sector there with respect to the comprehensive site that's happening there with the owners on the northwest corner. So we got that going on, and also the development happening on Shepherd. It is becoming a growing concern on infrastructure, and it has the decision that's been made by Metrolinx has great impact on our transportation plans and so forth, and it really sets us back dramatically. And my biggest concern, and I think Councillor Duddick would echo it, is our concern is when this is going to happen, because there's no there's no concern, date or timeline with respect to it. We're supposed to start this year, and unfortunately, it's not going to happen. Knowing full well we've expended probably $9.6 million in investment of the town's taxes with respect to doing the development around the tracks and so forth. And in good faith, we've worked with Metrolinx and moving this forward. I thought we've had a very strong agreement, but I understand it always comes down to the money situation and the double of the cost with respect to this project. Notwithstanding, may I suggest to staff and implore staff is that I know we're starting the wheels in motion to get Metrolinx back into this. What my concern is that once we have some decision, it's going to be down the line. God knows when it's going to happen, but the reality of it is we're going to start from scratch. What I'm suggesting is that maybe we can look at doing the plans and design now, continue on with expropriation of properties, doing those processes now, not to wait until we get the decision from Metrolinx. And I think that could be some of the ongoing discussions that can happen at this point in time. But again, I'd leave that to senior staff. I know, we just had this intergovernmental discussion, and I think that's really important that we're moving in that direction. I know this is a very integral part of the Kerr Street and Spears Road intersection. And at the other concern I have too is that with Metrolinx doing all the development and the electrification building on Trafalgar, there has been opening it up, and unfortunately the traffic is starting to really be a difficulty on Kerr Street. So I implore the staff and the people at Metrolinx to get back to the table and let's get this thing moving again. And I'm hoping our senior staff can make this happen. So I just leave it as that. Councillor Robertson, if you have any discussion with respect to the Burloak one, that's my discussion on the Kerr Street one.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Robertson.
I would like to reiterate the Kerr Street is vital. And so as a town-wide councillor, not just a ward councillor, I implore Metrolinx to get everything going in terms of funding this. In terms of the Burloak, I look at it and it's been 28 years since there was an agreement to say that there was an underpass needed at that location. 28 years later, they've figured out the funding was way more. And while they have come down in terms of what we've had to add to our total, it's still a cost overrun that all the taxpayers in Oakville will have to absorb. It's a key corridor between Oakville and Burlington. It's a key corridor as the Wycroft Bridge is going to be completed. And because Bronte, like Kerr Village, is a growth hub, we have more and more development, and Bronte Road just can't absorb that number of cars from Lakeshore Woods and coming across to get to the GO station every day or to get to other parts of Oakville. So this is such a needed access to get through. So we need that piece to get together. We need it not to take to 2027. It just seems like it's a drawn out process that was supposed to been finished this year. And if we have to wait for another 5 years, that bridge will be done before, with very few people that can access it. So this is what the motion is about in terms of our ward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson. And Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I wonder if at the appropriate time we could maybe have a recorded vote similar to what we did at the region. It just speaks volumes in terms of the support we have at the local and the regional level for these two very important projects. It has been a group effort between ourselves and Burlington. Thanks to Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Sharman, who introduced a motion at the region that was very well received. There was considerable discussion that took place in regards to the urgency of both crossings being pushed forward and not stalled any further, as Councillor Robertson had referred. it's important to remember that this is the fourth rated priority for Metrolinx for Kerr Street. And it speaks volumes that if it's the fourth in terms of safety, and this is being shelved for the time being until a later date, doesn't really speak too much in favor of Metrolinx, what shall I say, reputation. And it brings me back to that previous opportunity we had where they came to council and delegated and were absolutely gobsmacked by the fact that we were less than appreciative of their efforts thus far and their reputation in our community as saying one thing and not doing anything. And great with announcements, very poor with follow through and making things happen. We entered into those agreements in good faith. And I don't think any delay is a benefit to anybody, especially as Councillor Chisholm had referenced. We've got all kinds of development taking place, especially with that comprehensive land review at Kerr and Spears. There's no way that can go forward. No way until such time as this is addressed. We're already beyond the capability of being able to deal with traffic in the area. Spears and Kerr is a very, very curious cross or intersection. I'd also like to thank the mayor and Mayor Mead Ward for their efforts as well. I know you've been doing a lot of behind the scenes and in front of the scenes in the future regarding advocating on our behalf, but I think we as a council have to step up to the plate and say that we are 100% saying get on with this project and enough with the delays and enough with the double talk and promises. It's time to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Are there other speakers? I propose to put the vote then. If there's anyone who would object to this motion, would you indicate now? And there being no objection showing, Madam Clerk, would you record this as a recorded vote? As we've been doing through the pandemic here, we found a faster way to do a recorded vote than previously. I'll just say for the sake of the public that these projects were unique in that the complete say over timing, scoping, and bidding was to be in the hands of Metrolinx with no not even consultation with us. Right. And as a result, we insisted on and received contracts where our participation was capped, since they were responsible for delays and scope creep and their peculiar bidding system. And so my position, and I believe it's yours as well with this resolution, has been that since they took all the power, they get all the risk, and we're capped. And the project's overdue. I will add that in a conversation with Metrolinx, the CAOs of Burlington and Oakville, I believe, were told that electrification, that the Kerr Street underpass will need to be done before electrification. And I remember remarking at the time that there's your first evidence that electrification is not going to happen on time either. Exactly. So congratulations, Metrolinx. So there being no objection, I declare that carried unanimously, and I thank everybody, and the clerks will look after the recording of the vote. We have no regional reports or questions regarding town boards and advisory committees. Are there any requests for report? I'm not aware of any, but I was going to ask that before I say I have none. So good. Now that brings me back to the last couple of public items. This must be passed in public, and this is, so I need a mover for this, and this is 10.2, the OEC update, and it reads, as in your agenda, that the confidential briefing report dated March 10th, 2022, addressed to Douglas Carr, Town Solicitor, from Sean McCon, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer of Oakville Enterprises, attached as confidential Appendix A and distributed to the mayor and members of council only, be received. May I have a mover for that? Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that carries. The next one's similar. This also must be passed in public and has two parts. One, that the confidential report entitled OEC Update Legal from the Legal Department dated March 15th be received. And two, that staff report back to council by means of a confidential report from the Legal Department at the April or May 2022 council meeting. And could I have a mover for that? Councillor Knoll, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that carries. And now, where is my, Madam Clerk, just 1 second here. Okay. Now, what we're proposing to do is to go into camera as the final business of the evening. And the reason to go into camera to a session closed to the public is for the purpose of dealing, so this concerns the OEC update, for the purpose of dealing with the security of the property of the municipality, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or organization, and a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, and for the purpose of dealing with the security of the property of the municipality and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. So I need a mover for that. And that's Councillor Adams. Thank you. Any objection? There being none, that means that is carried. And the public business of this meeting has now been concluded. And we will take a short 5-minute break while the council meeting is configured for a session closed to the public. And then when we come back from that, we will pass the bylaws, and that'll be the only business left. Councillor Adams?
Just a quick nicety. I think what you see in call-in user 1 is actually Councillor Lishchina, who had some internet issues and converted to a call-in. So when we're switching over to the in-camera session, I think that might be who that is.
That's right. So we will communicate with her and make sure it's her. All right, we are in recess for 5 minutes while all of the technicalities of this are accomplished. So I think we're back in public session. I'm going to call us back to order. All right. Council has met in a session closed to the public for purposes permitted under the Municipal Act, for the purpose of dealing with the security of the property of the municipality, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations, information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person, group of persons, or organization, and a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, and for the purpose of dealing with the security of the property of the municipality and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Council took no decisions in that session. It's now in order let's see, on page 9. It's now in order for a motion to rise and report to council. And Councillor Elgar, thank you for that. Is there any objection? There being none, that carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 7.1, 7.2, and discussion items 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5, and confidential discussion items 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4, as noted by the clerk, and the notice of motion of grade separation. Could I have a mover and seconder to adopt my report? Councillor Dudek and Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection to the report? There being none, the report is adopted. Thank you, everybody. We covered everything else before we went into camera, and that brings us to consideration and reading of the bylaws. And a motion and a second would be in order now. Councillor Haslet-Deal and Councillor Chisholm, thank you. This is for consideration of reading of the bylaws as listed in the agenda. And is there any objection to the bylaws? There being none, the bylaws are read, considered, and passed. And that ends the work of the meeting. It's and we didn't go past the witching hour, so well done, everybody. It's been terrific working with you, and that ends the meeting. Look forward to the next time.